give me a signal, صح؟ طيب. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. From Masjid al-Ummah, we greet you all with the greeting of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace, blessings and mercy of Allah be with you. This is the 14th segment of the series on family in Islam. Actually, it is the last part that deals with the notion of obligation, mutual obligations between parents and children. The fundamental source of that, as I mentioned in the previous session last Friday, is a very interesting volume that was produced by the Islamic Committee, International Committee on the matter of women and children, which is written together by a good number of senior and well-known scholars. When we speak about the rights of children, according to the volume, they divide it into 5 sections. However, I found there have been some sort of repetition, so I'm trying to consolidate that a little bit and to have some organized and concise way of review. In the first section, the first section deals with the care that should be given to the children even from the very beginning of the family, not after marriage even. But let's take that into 4 sub-points to clarify it. First of all, according to the Quran, children are a great gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is something that is innate in the nature of human being, the pure nature, to continue the human race on this earth. And for that reason, we find that first, the Islam forbade sterilization, any form of permanent sterilization for man or woman, unless there is a therapeutic or medical emergency or necessity. But short of that, it is haram in Islam to sterilize, just to avoid having children, and that applies to both. Secondly, still within the first point, first section, Islam also forbade abortion. In fact, there is a right also for the embryo to live and grow. However, Sharia is always cognizant of the needs of the humans because Sharia is from Allah and Allah knows best our needs. There are some exceptions to that. The scholars say that, for example, if there is a danger to the life of the mother, if abortion is not done, then it would be permissible. This document and other thing I read for other scholars also both emphasize that it is not really to belittle the life of the embryo, because the embryo, or the embryo's life, you might say, is not as certain as someone who's already living. So the mother is a human being who's living already. In the case of embryo, as we all know, whether the embryo will be born naturally? Would it be a stillbirth, for example? Would the child be born alive or not? So there is some degree of uncertainty as compared or contrasted with the certainty of the life of the mother who's already there. Secondly, in the matter of relationship and the agony as a result of death, both death of the mother versus the embryo who has not been born yet, we find that the mother definitely takes precedence because she has already established relationship with parents, with husband, with other children, with relatives, with friends. And as such, the loss of the mother becomes agonizing for a whole lot of people, in fact, for that matter. That does not apply to the embryo. So that's why, while abortion itself is highly discouraged, it's haram actually, and highly discouraged, even if some harm is there, but not to the point of threatening the life of the mother. And there is also a very logical rule. The mother is like the tree, for example, al-asl, and a baby that may be born or will be born is the branch. And obviously, you don't cut the roots of the tree for the sake of keeping the branch. These are all reasoning. But are there cases also where abortion might be resorted to for other reasons other than the life of the mother? This has been debated by scholars, and I honestly give you both views, and which one I personally tend to accept or consider to be more desirable opinion to follow. Traditionally, there have been an argument not only within the Muslim community, but also within other religious communities, like among Christians and others, and could be also an argument from the standpoint of the law. So there are many facets to that issue. When does life begin? We find that in some religious groups, for example, they say life begins simply with the fertilized ovum. Just once, the fertilization started, that's it. That appeared to be perhaps going to an extreme in terms of life, because when you talk about fertilized ovum, microscopic, it is not really viable life. It is probable life. It is a seed of the beginning of development of the embryo and hence life. In Muslim perspective, some scholars, many scholars in fact, refer to one particular hadith or two in which basically it goes like this, that the person is created in the womb of his mother 40 days as alaqa, al-mudgha, and then it becomes alaqa, ila akhirih. So it adds 40, 40, 40. So that's 120 days, means fourth month. That's the way the hadith has been interpreted, and Ghazali have taken that opinion. Even other contemporary scholars, for example, they take it as such. So they say it is after that the Prophet ﷺ say, ثُمَّ يُنْفَخُ فِيهِ الرُّوحِ. So the ruh is breathed into the embryo. But let's be careful here. Ruh here does not mean biological life. Biological life is there in the fertilized ovum. There's no question about that. So ruh is something, is only of the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because again, if my understanding is correct, The physicians say that even the primitive heart begins much earlier even than the fourth or the third, fourth month, 120 days. Even, and I've seen pictures, videos even of the beginning of the blood flowing. So the ruh here, in my humble understanding, is that the secret of life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestow into that embryo. It could be a reference to the spiritual element of that make a person not just lump of cells, but really a beginning of a viable human being. So that has been a very common interpretation. However, a Muslim physician, Dr. Try to get you his name. Anyway, inshallah, it probably will come to me. He has written on that subject about embryonic development and life. And he has, in addition to his medical profession, has good knowledge also, mashallah, very knowledgeable about Sharia and well-read in the study of hadith. And he made a very convincing argument that this 40 is not necessarily a succession, but there is some kind of overlap. And he referred to other ahadith even that says the ruh is breathed around the 42nd day. So with his interpretation, that he's inclined actually to 40 to 42 days, 6 weeks. Those of you who studied biology, human biology, you will notice that there are distinct periods. Sometimes you find it even in the cover, in the inside cover of books on embryology, that this is the time, in fact, where, like I mentioned earlier, there are some signs even physically in terms of the primitive heart development. So there is, they consider the 7th week as one of the distinct stages in development. I have seen myself and some of the so-called pro-life groups, not necessarily Muslim, pro-life groups, who showed videos and pictures that actually when you're talking about the 7th week, you find that the essential features of a human embryo begin to take shape, really. It's not totally complete, but begin even to take some shape, which means abortion at that time means that you're cutting and pulling and tearing apart, this mini human being, if that is the more correct of that hadith. I'm more inclined to that only on the basis of the fact that many scholars in the past, like Al-Ghazali and others, and even contemporary scholars, they legitimately gave their juridical opinion for that. They are the knowledgeable people. But of course, with the development of knowledge, it would be very beneficial. Alhamdulillah, some fiqh or jurisprudence meetings and conferences are moving into that direction. So if they consult and see what the physicians also say, it might give some light. If the hadith can be interpreted in one way or the other, I would be inclined actually to the 42 days, because beyond that, it is gruesome really to see movies or films on tearing or aborting the child. I'm sure I've gone a little longer than that, because in this halaqat we try to take the rule of Sharia also, and try whenever some good reason to examine as a weighing factor. This is only an opinion, interpretation of the hadith. It's not, total new ideas or anything of that nature. So they could be min al-murajjahat, it could be useful for weighing various opinions. I think I mentioned as a striking example in one of those halaqas in the series that there have been a juridical opinion even that says that the maximum pregnancy is 1 year. So obviously, this is only one opinion. It's not a text in the Quran. It is an interpretation, like Sheikh Abdullah Jazawallah Khayran explained in the khutbah today. There's a difference between definitive text that has only one meaning, definitive in meaning, definitive in authenticity, in which case there is no way around it. So either you accept it or you take your own way. But if it is a comment of humans, the great scholar themselves said there is nobody who is ma'soom or infallible except Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, because he received the revelation directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know now, I mean, ask anyone, that it's not a disputed area in the science of embryology, that the maximum really is 9 months. Sometimes it could be 2 weeks, like physicians say, 2 weeks later or 2 weeks earlier. And sometimes even this variation could be because of miscalculation as to when conception really started. But to talk about pregnancy 1 year, that might raise a question really. So there is no harm then taking other legitimate opinions of scholars that it is actually 9 months. Okay, having hopefully explained that, we move on, it's still within the first section, to a second of 4 points. And that is, aside from the necessity of a child being born only in legitimate Sharia marriage between man and woman, people are free to believe what they want, to live whatever they want, but that's what Islam teaches very clearly. That the care for the child, as mentioned in the very introductory words, actually begins even before the baby is born. For example, the Prophet ﷺ said, تَخَيَّرُوا لِنُطَفِكُمْ فَإِنَّ الْعِرْقَ دَسَّاسٌ. In other words, when you get married, if you translate it in simple language, make sure who you're choosing. And even he might be talking about genetic inheritance, الْعِرْقَ دَسَّاسٌ. I think it could also refer to the character of the woman that you're marrying. And that's even more important than just making sure that she's a healthy woman, for that matter. And what proves that are the number of ahadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam of choosing the spouse, either male or female for that matter. That people marry or choose people because of wealth, because of their nobility of their stock or family, or because of beauty, or because of being religious. That has been the instruction of the Prophet, فَاظْفَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ تَرِبَتْ يَدَكَ, that it is a great win for you to marry a woman really who has deen. Of course, it doesn't mean that other criteria are not important. If she's beautiful and from good stock and she's wealthy and she's religious, but it's a matter of priority. As I mentioned in one occasion, like your Egyptian brothers and sisters say, زِيَدْتِ الْخِيرِ خِيرين. So if you have something that's good and we have something also that's good, because beauty is good also, that's fine, that's our human nature. But it's a matter of what priorities to choose. So that is a second point on even the choice before marriage. The other point to add in terms of this inclusive, long-term kind of care of the baby is that, subhanAllah, it includes, as we said before, even getting married, but it includes the period of pregnancy, the time of birth, the period from birth, and when the child reaches sin al-tamyiz, to be a child beyond baby or toddler. Many scholars estimate that to be like 6 or 7 years that the person really understands to some degree. The period between that age, 6 or 7, and adolescence. And adolescence in Sharia, of course, is well known. It has certain signs, no particular date, but normally it happens in most cases within the early teens. There might be some exceptions to that. And then even between adolescence, the difficult years, and when the child really reaches an age of independence. يحضرني في ذلك, something comes to my mind here, and forgive me if I might have repeated that or said it again in some other session of this long series. It doesn't hurt. It is attributed to Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anh, the nephew of the Prophet ﷺ and his son-in-law. He said, play with your child for 7 years. This is the ultimate of wisdom. Why? Because, and we'll see inshallah some evidence as we go on also, when the child is that young, you cannot explain to him the theory of Einstein or the theory of relativity or the quadruple equation. Obviously, he's very simple, and his makeup is to play. All of us who have children or grandchildren, or in my case, great-grandchildren more recently, they love to play. And it's not only play. They are thirsty for love. And if they don't feel that warmth, love, and care, it could be quite devastating for them in the psychological sense. And that's why, yes, there may be some need to send kids to babysitters or nannies or this or that, but nobody really can replace the mother. So it has to be really an absolute necessity, and the priority should be really to show that. A person who is starved emotionally may not necessarily grow as a good person. And then Sayyidina Ali goes on to say, and discipline him or her for 7 years. Because, of course, once the child reaches that age, and those who have experience, in the age of 7, 6, the child sometimes tries to test the patience of his parents, to try to, do some funny things or become a little bit. So that's the matter of discipline. Discipline is not beating. That's a gross misunderstanding, even in some hadith about that. Actually, if the parents are giving good example, they don't have to tell their child to pray. He automatically, perhaps, will follow suit. But in the meantime, when we talk about discipline, it could be, you might say, using the weapon of love rather than the stick. Okay? Some psychologists, for example, tell you that discipline could be simply showing displeasure, but keeping loving, not getting into anger or rash action. It could be deprivation of something that's sanctioned in a way. So you're not causing harm, but depriving a child of something that they like, and they know why, and only for a temporary period. Once they're repaired, all love and affection can be showed to them. So that's the second 7. And then he says, befriend him, or in the case of mother, for his daughter also, befriend him for another 7. That is the teenage years and beyond. So 19, 20, 21. See, it's divided roughly to this 7. The third 7, you have to deal with them like a friend rather than use your authority. I am the father, I'm telling you to do this. Why, Dad? Because I say that. You know, that's... Sometimes you might get some resistance. Yes, there is no issue, because they're growing, they're trying to prove also their independent entity. So that's the time to exchange. What if you neglect this recommendation of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anh, and you deal with the teens in the same way you deal with the youngsters, the 8th or something? It becomes very, very devastating in one sense, that they may lose trust in you. And if they do something wrong, they will never tell you because they're scared of being punished. What is more important, even if they did something wrong, is to make them feel that they could communicate, they could talk, especially the girl with her mother, not restricting to that, but in many feminine aspects, she might feel at ease more to speak with the mother and the boy with the father. If they lose that trust, they would go and ask their friends, and sometimes they will get a terrible advice for that. That's why psychologists and people dealing with teen problems, they say keep communication no matter what. No matter, even if the child is doing something wrong or haram. You don't agree with them. Make it clear that this is not acceptable, but don't discourage them from talking with you. If you cut communication, that's even more serious. But the truth has to be made clear. A third point, which is distinct in Islamic Sharia as compared with other UN, for example, conventions about the children, is that the necessity or the care of children is not only the physical only, like to provide them with food and clothing and toys and all of these, but it is a more comprehensive approach of raising the children. I see the materialistic thinking might only lead to well, how come the child did this and that? I gave him food, I bought him the best clothes, designer shoes, and this and that. How come he's doing that? And not realizing that the child needs time, the time of the parents, no matter how busy they are. And the family, from an Islamic perspective, is really the proper and natural place for the child to, as a school, before going to school, even preschool. I think one of the Egyptian poets, I think probably Hafiz Ibrahim or Shawqi, anyway, الأم مدرسة إذا أعددتها أعددت شعبا طيب الأعراق, or something to that. It's poetry. Basically, this is the mother. The mother is a school. Yes, the father also could be part of that school, but in the earlier years of the child, he or she spend a lot more time with the mother than he does with the father. In the ordinary way, especially when the children take priority, they take all the time of the mother. That's why she's very much elevated in status because of that. So he says basically that the mother is a school, and if you prepare that school, meaning a good mother, a righteous mother, educated mother, then you will be preparing a whole generation that will be produced through those mothers. In the Quran also we find, and the Hadith as well, we find emphasis again on the upbringing of the children. قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. O believer, save yourselves and your families hellfire, not hunger. Of course you have to save them from hunger, but also from the moral, spiritual perspective, from the good manners and morality. That is the proper place for the school. Nobody else can do the job really fully as best as a believing, practicing Muslims. And then we find also a reference to that in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, whose meaning that no person born, he didn't say Muslim, ما من مولود, any person who's born anywhere is born على الفطرة, in the pure innate nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have created humans accordingly. But then he says, but then his parents make him a Jew or a Christian or a Sabian. Majus, there are more than one interpretation of it. Anyway, and that is in Sahih al-Bukhari, so it's a sound and strong hadith. So that means a child is ready. It's just like a dough. You can do a lot of things with it. So if you find a good, believing parents, Muslim parents, for example, then they will raise him on Islam. It would not be changing him to be a Muslim, because the Prophet consider him is like a Muslim. The fitrat Allah, it's the fitrah of Allah that people are created accordingly. But then it is the environment and family. So the role of the family here is quite essential, not only for Muslims, for others. A fourth one on that first section, that the question again of good example, that if both husband and wife observe the teaching of the Quran and the Sunnah, an example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and follow the criteria for successful marriage by being good to one another. I'm not saying there will be no argument sometimes, but never an argument in front of the children. It devastates them. It makes them feel insecure, especially by raising the voice, and worst, by resorting to any form of physical violence. If they want to discuss that, it could be in a very quiet way without the children being there, or if necessary, keep it delayed until where they're alone. But the child who sees parents loving one another, caring for one another, showing genuine love, helping each other, definitely it goes a long way of a child be more likely, I'm not saying 100%, more likely to emulate their parents when they mature. Now we can at least take a second section of 4 or 5, maybe 4. Anyway, is the entitlement and rights of children from the standpoint of their basic human rights and the matter of freedom. This, I'll put it in a rather brief way in 8 points. 1, the right of life and continue to live and to grow. This is applicable to all. I think that has been partly mentioned also, of the protection even since the conception and the prohibition of abortion. So that has been covered. Secondly, that it is forbidden to do any harm to the fetus, and if any harm is done, for example, like pushing the pregnant mother or something of that nature, there are certain punishments that could be civil. In some cases, it could be even regarded as a crime. Even, according to some, before ruh has been breathed into the fetus. 3, to spend, even if he's a fetus, you don't spend on the fetus directly. Hey, take this $10 and buy what you want. Obviously, meaning here that you're obligated to spend on the mother, not only by providing her needs, but the health care of the mother is also spending on the baby, because you have to keep her in good health. And the Quran is clear on that. وَإِن كُنَّ أُولَاتِ حَمْلٍ فَأَنْفِقُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ حَتَّى يَضَعْنَ حَمْلَهُنَّ. That if the wives, or even the case of divorcees even, If they are pregnant, you have to spend upon them, actually it's related to divorce, because after divorce you have to spend still on your wife. So even in divorce, if they're pregnant, as I mentioned in a previous session, that the iddah waiting period, where a woman cannot remarry, in the case of a woman who's pregnant, is not the 3 months in the normal case, not the 4 months and 10 days in case of a widow, but it could be close to 9 months. Once you utter the divorce and she's conceived already, or it's shown, the conception took place before, but it's shown shortly after that, then you're obligated to spend on them until the birth of the baby. That's the end of the iddah, or waiting. So that's quite clear in the Quran. The fourth aspect of the rights of the baby is to allow in Sharia the pregnant mother and the breastfeeding mother, suckling mother, to even not fast in the month of Ramadan if there is any fear of danger, either to herself or to her fetus or both. This is a matter that a Muslim woman in modern age, if she has any questions, she can consult with a gynecologist, and preferably a female Muslim gynecologist, someone who knows also about the teaching of Islam, so we take it seriously. But of course, if there is no professional who's a Muslim, there's absolute need, then of course she can ask even a non-Muslim. But it's better to ask a Muslim who appreciates the importance of fasting. So in that case, she can break the fast, but she can fast other days, after she delivered the baby or when she is good. Some people ask a common question. They say, does she have to make up for the days she missed in fasting before the next Ramadan? It may be preferable, but not a must. Preferable because if you keep delaying and delaying and delaying, the accumulation of days to make up for might get too difficult. But it is not really a must, that you have to do it under any circumstances. And understanding the yusr of Sharia without ma'asiyah, yusr meaning to make the life of people easy, especially mothers who go through all of these difficulties. There is nothing wrong at all to choose to make up for the missed day in days that are short. There's no harm in that. In Ramadan, for example, in December time, where the day is short, that makes it easier on the mother. There's no harm or sin in that. It's a Quranic principle to have that. Another second point on this issue, because all of that relates to the right of life, the basic human right. Another right of the child is to be received with joy, and whether a boy or girl. In fact, the Quran criticized and reproached people who used to feel happy when the child, the born child is a male, but to feel very disappointed if female. وَإِذَا بُشِّرَ أَحَدُهُمْ بِالْأُنْثَى ظَلَّ وَجْهُهُ مُسْوَدًّا وَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. That if one of them receives the news of a birth of a child, meaning a male, if the child is a female, his face would be darkened and is in a very strong state of grief. The Quran criticized all of that, let alone stopped female infanticide. So one should be happy with both. Both are gifts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and both are partners in the service of Allah. Allah created us all, as in Surah An-Nisa, male and female. The other part of good reception of the child is to give the child, male or female, a good name. I'll tell you something. I'm not sure of that, but I'm speaking sometimes about Egypt, so nobody says that you're picking on anyone else. And at least I know among the audience here is a brother from Egypt, so you correct me of that. It's a superstition sometimes, and among some less educated Muslims. They say, for example, if a woman loses her baby and gets her baby born, doesn't live, another baby. So some people advise her, say, give him a bad name. So, for example, if she calls him Humar or Gahs, mule or something, thinking that this, isn't that true? That this is something, maybe that was disappearing now in modern Egypt, but since I'm very old, I remember some of that stuff. Okay, but no, you're not allowed to give a name because it is superstition. To give a good name or bad name itself, it doesn't affect life or death, which is always in the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you don't give a bad. And by the way, and as an evidence of that, you see, for example, they say Ailt al-Gahsh, the family of Gahsh, the family of mule. So that name carries over in many other generations. So that should be. And by the way, let me say something frank also, that apply not only in choosing a good name for the baby, boy or girl, that it applies even to adults. A few examples from the reaction of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. First of all, if the name of the person, for example, before accepting Islam, is contrary to Muslim belief, for example, somebody's name was, and among the contemporaries of the Prophet ﷺ, there were people like that, Abd al-Uzza, the slave servant, and they give a name of one of the idols. That is contrary to Aqidah. We are servants, all of us, rich and poor, whatever, all of us are servants of Allah. In fact, being servant or slave servant of Allah has a beautiful meaning, not like the human meaning. And that's why in Surah Al-Isra, when Allah narrates and recounts his blessing on Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam about Al-Isra, the night journey, he says, Subhanalladhi asra bi'abdihi, referring to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, give him the honor. Blessed be he who took his servant, slave servant, Muhammad abdihi, at night, in a night journey from Masjid al-Haram to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. So this is the name that are no, because how could you be a believer and you're not Abdullah? But the best actually is Abdul Rahman, Abdullah, Abdul Samad, ila akhirih. Secondly, there are names that are not haram, but they are contrary to the overall personality of a Muslim and the teaching of Islam. Example, one person came to the Prophet ﷺ and his name was Harb, war. You know, the Prophet ﷺ asked him, is it to say you must? But take another name rather than Harb. That reflects the whole concept that peaceful coexistence and salam is the fundamental rule. Harb is only the exception for self-defense or resistance to oppression. A woman came to him. He asked her, what is your name? She said, Asiya. Asiya in Arabic means rebellious. He said, no, change it to Jamila, which means beautiful. Okay? So this is the attitude of the Prophet ﷺ. So that applies not only in choosing good name for the child, but also. But one point to clarify, when somebody accepts Islam, there is a myth that he has to change his name. You don't. Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali radiallahu anh, Abdul Rahman did not change their name when they became Muslims. The Prophet only asked for people whose name is offensive to change or to beautify their names better. A third aspect is to maintain and respect the independent identity of the child. Identity is not only his or her lineage, but also their cultural background, their religious and civilizational belonging. And in fact, one of the observations made by some scholars that if you look either at the concept of slavery in North America in particular, that people's name were not respected. You know, some of the people who made the research, like, you know, Roots, that some of the African American who came, good percentage of them, some of them say 30%, maybe 1/3, were Muslims. Educated, some memorized even parts of the Quran. But their so-called masters were so brutal that they gave them Western name. You know, the name means a lot. From Abdul Rahman to Robert. You know, it's a cultural name. It has its meaning to other people. Not only this, but they prevented them even from practicing their faith, to the point that one of them narrated that he used to hide in the stable in the early morning to do his prayer because of his coat. He will be in big trouble. So forcing a religion, forcing a language, even those who came with their language was all wiped out. Not so in the teaching of Islam. Even if we are taking care of a non-Muslim, we have to respect their identity. We don't change their names, but this is part of hegemony that was reflected and should not be applied to anyone, really. Fourth, it is forbidden to make any favoritism or discrimination between children. The most inclusive and eloquent short hadith of that, اعدلوا بين أبنائكم. Be fair between your children. Abna, by the way, is used in the Quran sometimes to refer to both male and female, not male only. اعدلوا بين أبنائكم. That is, do justice. And not justice in terms of giving them, you know, food or drink or clothing, but as much justice as you can in terms of love and affection. And parents of young kids, beware. If you have two kids closer in age, there is, of course, the prince or princess, the first one born. Somebody comes after 2 years, and they're cute and so on. And you keep showing love and affection to one and forget the other. This is very damaging psychologically. And usually when I have my kids, one of my kids, playing with one of my grandkids, her own son or daughter, and praise, and I intervene and say, and also so and so is so good in this and that. Always try to balance it. Otherwise, jealousy might really be very destructive. Fifthly, 5 of 8, the care of the child in terms of health, in terms of helping them, encouraging them to play sports. This is nothing wrong. Subhanallah, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, المؤمن القوي خير من المؤمن الضعيف وفي كل خير. The believer who is, in addition to Iman, is strong physically, is even more beloved by Allah from someone who's weak, doesn't care much about his health. وفي كل خير, even though there is goodness in both. So that area or period of life, early childhood, when they get into sports, it affects their health for years and years to come. Fifthly, part of also care is applicable to adults as well, by avoiding the child being exposed to diseases. For example, if there's a spread of contagious disease in the school or other place, or one has to be very careful also. About the love and affection, I just remember something, two references. There are lots of things about this in hadith. That the Prophet ﷺ used to carry Ummah, the daughter of his daughter, so that was his grandchild, his daughter of his Zainab, his daughter. He used to pray and carry her in prayers. So you carry her, make ruku', but when he goes to sajda, he puts her on the ground as a baby to make his tasbih, and then carry her again and stand and complete his salah. And this is very revealing because it speaks about, for those who think that a boy is preferable to a girl, the Prophet Muhammad is doing that. He did it with Hassan and Hussein, radiallahu anhum, others. He did it also with females like Umama. And one time the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting there, and there was a man by the name of Al-Aqra ibn Habis. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam kissed one of his grandchildren, you know, his beloved ones, Hassan or Hussein, doesn't matter. Kissed one of them. So this man says, "Do you guys kiss your boys?" He said, "Yes." He said, "I have 10 boys and I never kissed any one of them." The Prophet ﷺ answers in one version, "Man la yarham, la yurham." The one who doesn't show mercy will not receive mercy. I remember reading even another version of that hadith. What can I do if Allah has taken mercy from your heart? So I even reproached him for this attitude. Seventhly, also to help the child enjoy also their spare time. It's not that you have to memorize Quran all day and memorize a hadith. Even for adults, the Prophet ﷺ says, "Istarwihu sa'atan ba'da sa'a, فإن القلوب إذا كلت عميت," which means take some recreation and rest. Yani work and rest, because if you keep working constant, he says the heart will be blinded, in referring that a person would reach a point really that they're not really quite normal or balanced in their life. And finally, the freedom of thought, the freedom of expression, provided we have to teach our children also responsible freedom of expression, asking questions, even things that might sound out of this world. Don't show any discouragement, because again, like we mentioned earlier, they were going to ask someone who will give him a terrible answer. Encourage them to ask and express themselves. It is reported that the Prophet ﷺ, sometimes when he passed by children, he says, "Go, اذهب والعب," go and play, encouraging them and giving sanction. So this is basically like the two sections. What is the time now? 7:48. Okay, I think we might finish with one or two more points, inshallah, within the hour that I wouldn't exceed, because the ones I come to are simpler. The third fasl, or section, deal with the personal law for the child. One, of course, is nasab, lineage. And even if there is a person who is abandoned, people like leave a baby in the door of a hospital or whatever, or a person who's born out of wedlock, it is not his responsibility. لا يكلف الله نفسا. You see, كل نفس بما كسبت. The Quran says you don't punish someone for something that he didn't do. Those to be punished or forgiven are the ones who committed that. So no matter what, there's no stigma because the person doesn't know his parents. But the rule in the Quran in Surah Al-Ahzab, "Ud'uhum li'abaihim." You don't change the identity of the child. So if it's Abdul Rahim, Ibrahim, don't say Abdul Rahim Badawi. Give him your own last name. This is forbidden. There is a strong hadith in that, actually, muttafaqun alayh, which means in the two greatest book of hadith, al-Bukhari and Muslim, "Man idda'a ila ghayri abihi wa huwa ya'lam annahu ghayru abi fal jannatu alayhi haram." Anyone who knowingly say that my father is so and so, the Jannah, unknowingly do that, he is forbidden Jannah. So this is something of the respect of lineage. Secondly, of 4 points, al-rada, suckling, he is entitled to suckling. We mentioned that earlier, but here we emphasize another ayah in the Quran, that the maximum period of suckling that the child may be entitled to, depending of course on consultation, mutual consultation between the father and mother, is 2 years. And the ayah in the Quran, وَالْوَالِدَاتُ يُرْضِعْنَ أَوْلَادَهُنَّ حَوْلَيْنِ كَامِلَيْنِ لِمَنْ أَرَادَ أَن يُتِمَّ الرِّضَاعَةَ. Those suckling mothers, breastfeeding mothers, shall or will, if you will, because shall is much stronger anyway, suckle their baby for 2 full years. And another ayah says, وَحَمْلُهُ وَفِصَالُهُ 30 شهرا. The pregnancy as well as the suckling is 30 months. And that's how jurists say that the least period of pregnancy, that's the khadaj, the people or children who are born before the term of 9 months, but in a viable age. And viable age change also the medical means and so on. But basically, it was known to be 6, and by experience, 6 months was quite viable. Sometimes, as you know today, some of them has to go into an incubator. So that's the least, and plus the 2 years, so that's 30 months. The ayah, so the Quran explained itself for this matter. The other thing we spoke about in the previous section last week, so I would not go into the detail. We spent considerable time about hadana in the case of divorce, for example. But I just mentioned one thing quickly, not the rules and entitlement. But what we said last time, that the word hadana is much more affectionate than just talking about custody. You can have custody of dogs also. But hadana is from hadn, just like embracing the absolute form of affection. And the Prophet ﷺ in more than one book of hadith has been quoted as saying, it is not one of us who shows mercy to our youngsters and respect to our elders. All these things have flown away in a materialistic society. No respect for parents, no rahmah for children. Fourthly, an-nafaqah, like we said earlier, but to extend it also until what time? Until the child is able to earn their living. So you might say perhaps, it varies of course, because it's not a matter of age but maturity really. So if a child has some difficulty or challenges, physical or mental, that require more hadana, more care, he should also be provided that care. The fourth one, and we might carry from there inshallah next time, that, or maybe we should stop at that. It's probably over 50 now. 53. Since we started a little earlier, inshallah we'll stop at that because we'll take a little bit more time in the other one and continue from there to try and finish up the children and also the right of parents, pass quickly on it. But inshallah there is some possible series that might start in a week or two, inshallah ta'ala. This was suggested by Sheikh Abdullah, Jazawallahu khairan. That's the shubuhat, that there are certain areas that are mixed up in the minds of many people. Even though many of those shubuhat were covered in the matter of the Quran, but that was an ancient kind of series about the Quran, its authority, its preservation, and rules of interpretation as it applies to the ayat that deal with war and self-defense. Many of the shubuhat were covered, many, in the first earlier part of this series, which was not family, only women in Islam. And we went into great detail about some of the ahadith and ayat that has been misunderstood. And then, of course, the hadana and children. So it may be possible, inshallah, to have a different structure as our Imam suggested. I think he's right in this. Instead of this shubhat being scattered in different topics, to take them in a briefer form and in some kind of structure, and inshallah I'll try to work on some order that makes sense, make it a little organized to comprehend and go through, inshallah. But until that time, if you hear of any difficult question, yet you find hard to give a convincing answer, please email me. I don't have the answer for everything, but might have a little bit of here, and all add what we know together for better answer and da'wah in the time where lots of these shubhat are causing confusion even to some Muslims. I'll be talking about the rationale for that, inshallah, in a later time. My email, again, it is jamalbadawi1@gmail.com. The spelling, one word, Jamal, Jamal, and continue with the last name, Badawi, Jamal Badawi, and just the number 1, not in writing, 1. All of this is one word, @gmail.com. جزاكم الله خيرا وبارك الله فيكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Okay. Okay. جزاك الله خير. بارك الله فيك.
I have some of the PowerPoint slides I printed out for you from my professor.
Okay, I appreciate it. I can borrow and return it to you. Okay.
But, this is a textbook we've been using if you've seen it before here.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Can I borrow it for next time, or you finish your exam?
I finished my exam, but I need to give this to Sheikh Abdullah, I think, though.
Oh, okay. Okay. Then I can borrow it from him. Sorry. That's the textbook that you're using in the course, right?
Yes, this was the textbook. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, maybe he wants to read it first. I can see him.
So, here.
Okay.
So this is
Okay.
syllabus and stuff like
Okay. That's great. Inshallah. Try to read it hopefully before coming next Friday for the halaqah, inshallah.
On the final class, I recorded the audio of the final class I had with him.
Okay.
It's an hour and 18 minutes long, but I can send it.
Sheikh Abdullah told me that you gave it to him. Yeah.
Or send it to him, yes.
Yeah.
The thing is that, would you want me to send this to you too, or would you want?
Fine. I think it would be fine.
I don't know if I can
But
send
it
it.
might be a big file, right?
I can send it on WhatsApp, but I don't know about sending an email though. But I can.
Oh yeah,
WhatsApp.
WhatsApp. Oh, I can give you my WhatsApp. But would it take a big file?
I've sent it on WhatsApp before. I sent it to Imam Abdullah on WhatsApp, but I haven't sent it.
Okay, I'll give you the number if you do. Of course, it's 902.
I'll just record in my notes for now.
Oh,
Send it right
okay.
So 902
402
402
60
60
58.
58. Thank you so much.
And Jamal.
In the final class, basically, so there's one guy named, I think he said Scott Sirat al-Haq. He called him a scholar, right, this guy? And I saw a video of this Scott guy after class. He told him much of the